So welcome again to everybody. This is the August 14th meeting of the Town of Richmond Select Board. This is a special meeting. As you can see, we have more people at the table than we normally do. The other people here with us tonight are members of the Andrews Forest Cmte. Before we start anything, I'd just like to have an opportunity for everybody to go around and introduce themselves. We see the name tag, but nonetheless, just for the recording. So Daniel, would you start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Daniel Schmidt. I'm the RCC representative to the Andrews Forest Cmte.
David Sanders, Select Board.
Melissa Wolliver, just an at-large member of Andrews Forest Cmte.
Jay First, Select Board Chair.
Ian Stokes, recently joined the Andrews Forest Cmte, and for the time being, I'm interim co-chair along with Cecilia Danks.
Hi, and I'm Cecilia Danks. I've been on the Richmond Community Forest since it was the interim Richmond Community Forest Committee, and I'm an at-large member, currently interim co-chair.
Chase Rosenberg. I am the Richmond Trails Committee representative on the Forest Committee.
Julia Boutier, and I think I might be one of the newest members on the committee, and I appreciate the opportunity to join you all in some public service here. I'm delighted to be with you.
I'm Jeff Forward. I'm a member of the Select Board.
Hi, I'm Lisa Miller, Select Board.
Mr. Bard.
Hi, Bard Hill from the Select Board. Sorry, I'm not there this evening. I have a cold, and you're glad I'm not there this evening.
Thank you. Okay, so some procedural stuff. We have a lot of people here in the audience. I want to thank everybody for coming. I mean that sincerely. We don't have a lot of people on the Zoom yet, but that can change. We do have an agenda with a number of items that that Cecilia and Ian and Bard and some others recommended. We're going to go through these one by one with Cecilia and Ian primarily leading. I'm going to try to say as little as I can tonight, but there will be opportunity for questions. And so from time to time, we're going to stop before we move on to the next agenda item and see if there are questions and comments from the audience. So you will have a chance to be heard, but for the most part, we're going to go agenda topic, discussion, question, agenda topic, discussion, question. And I think we hopefully will have a productive meeting. The minutes will be being taken tonight by our town administrative assistant to the town manager, Duncan Wardwell. Duncan can write really fast, but he can't write as fast as sometimes we talk. So we're recording this, and he will be transcribing the minutes afterwards. Okay. Cecilia has a statement. Cecilia and Ian have a statement that they'd like to begin the meeting with. So if you'd like to go ahead.
I was asking Ian to read that statement.
Okay. Well, Cecilia and I are currently serving as interim co-chairs, as I mentioned, of the Andrews Committee. And we looked at the agenda and we recognized it as very ambitious. So we, together in several iterations, we put together a short statement, hoping that it'll be helpful to draw attention to areas in the agenda where we see scope for important progress. So firstly, we do thank the Select Board for calling this meeting, and our committee calling this meeting together with our committee to facilitate progress along with many community needs that you're addressing currently after historic amounts of flooding. So we are optimistic that an open discussion in this public meeting format will be productive for the work of the Andrews Committee and help us plan for the most appropriate management of the Andrews Forest. The agenda is wide-ranging and has very ambitious goals, so we're counting on the meeting chair and all of us present to work together to make this meeting as efficient as possible. So in looking at the agenda, Cecilia and I focused on 4 priorities. Firstly, it's important to clarify the required arrangement for recruiting and reviewing vacancies in the Andrews Forest Committee and the roles of our committee, the Select Board, and the Conservation Commission and the Trails Committee in identifying the most qualified applicants. So please help us identify the most efficient, equitable, and correct process. That's high on the agenda. Secondly, the benefits of the collaboration between the 4 committees that I mentioned is key to aligning management of the forest to community and other goals. So, question is, I hope we can address, how can that collaboration be improved? So thirdly, the Andrews Community Forest Committee has received substantial public input in meetings and online surveys, and has been criticized regarding its responsiveness in revising the management and trails plans. The committee is aware of this and has established recently 2 subcommittees that are already working to incorporate those concerns into a comprehensive management plan and a trail stewardship plan, which will become part of the management plan. The subcommittees are addressing many questions, such as, should all new trails necessarily be designated for mechanized, that is, bicycle travel? And what seasonal trail closures or monitoring data are needed in the management? So the challenge here is how best to accommodate public comment during that process. Fourthly, the perceived delays in establishing plans and resources for additional recreation opportunities have, while also respecting ecological concerns, have been frustrating to many people. So we would like to explore options for additional support to complete this work in a timely way and in which all voices feel heard. Finally, we do want to recognize the enormous workload and responsibilities of the elected members of the Select Board, as well as many hours put in by volunteers who serve on town committees. These efforts are not always visible and recognized. Occasional mistakes are inevitable, and we must all appreciate when they are recognized and corrected in the best interests of the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Chase. I'm Chase.
Yeah.
You look so much
He's
alike.
over there.
Okay, so our first agenda item tonight, and again, this is meant to be a discussion. I want everybody, like we're at Thanksgiving dinner, only without the drunk uncle. But our first agenda item is to review the role and authority of the Select Board and Andrews Community Forest Committee related to the Andrews Community Forest Management Plan and related construction and expenditures. Okay. So, do you want to sort of lead the discussion off? I'm gonna have to let you do that.
Okay, this was not one of the ones I added, so I don't know that I'll be addressing the concerns that prompted this agenda item. But I would say, I think that it's pretty clear to us that the Select Board is the decision-making body around the Andrews Community Forest. And if anything, the Andrews Community Forest Committee is kind of a deliberative body in the sense of we think through the options, converse through, collect the information, present our best advice and why those decisions were made and what the process was. So it's not that we're not making any decisions at all, or the Select Board doesn't do any deliberation at all, but I think a lot of that deliberation is on our responsibility to get input from the community, to craft, to try and build consensus, to bring in resources that are needed to make that happen, and then present our best work to the Select Board. So I don't know if that departs from anybody else's view.
That's right.
Okay, Jeff.
So what happens if, thank you for that. And that's how, I think all of our committees in town essentially work. What happens when there's not consensus on, a particular issue or direction? What do you think should happen? And that I guess that's a question for all of us. What should happen if there isn't a consensus on either a plan or construction or whatever?
I'll start off because you're looking at me, but everybody else should jump in what they think should be happening. I think we need to identify those points of contention, what the options are within that, where there's a chance to adapt not only what we do, but how we do it to address the needs. Educate each other and the community about what we think the key points are, the rationale that should be followed. And if necessary, present. I mean, it would be nice if we could just present one option and say, here you go, what we could present to the select board. And it would be good to know if you want that, a suite of options with pros and cons. Typically, and like, so my background is in forest management, typically through public land management at a big scale, not a 400-acre scale, but the 400,000-acre scale. You would put out several options and one preferred option, and the pros and cons of each and the rationale for the elements in the preferred option. That seems like a lot of work for the community forest. So I think we were kind of going towards just the preferred option, but there are different ways to handle it, particularly if there are points where there's no agreement.
Yeah, and I would say we work through points of contention all the time at every single meeting. And I think part of it is the culture that we've cultivated within our committee. There's a lot of seeds there. Has been one of listening to each other and knowing that compromise is a part of it, and then figuring out what parts of the plan we give and take on. And eventually we land in a place where I don't think any one person gets everything that they've ever dreamed of, but that it's part of a sort of a compromise that feels good for folks, and maybe we gain new understanding from a different perspective and why we might have changed our original thinking on how something should be a certain way.
But I might just add that I imagine you guys on the select board, you're probably dealing with hot topics all the time, right? So maybe you have some advice for us on managing and threading the needle among the breadth of perspectives that I'm sure you get here at this table as well.
Bard's got a stand up. Bard, go ahead.
You know, one thing that I've thought of that bears some similar features is our zoning regulations produced by the Planning Commission. And for those of you who have not followed the history of zoning regulations in Richmond, it's not always a happy path. But I think it's similar where the Planning Commission does its best to hear the different points of view. When it comes to the select board, if I remember correctly, most of it is accepted, and sometimes there are minor changes that occur. And often that's fed by a discussion of, well, tell us where the points of controversy were. And so that's just an example where there's kind of a similar path where the Planning Commission describes what they did and why they did it, the different opinions that led into that. And typically, I think they describe the same thing, where they spend a lot of time and work, they wordsmith stuff, they hear competing interests, very similar dynamics from, you know, one example was in the Gateway, I want a McDonald's and a car wash, to I want nothing, to housing. And so just maybe it has some similarities there. And I would only observe that I have strongly appreciate the patience of people involved in that process, as well as the patience of the folks involved in this one.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned this rather maybe unusual situation that our committee finds itself in, which is that we have a formal arrangement with two other town committees in addition to the select board, so that membership of the Andrews Committee includes a representative of the Conservation Commission and the Trails Committee, and also those bodies can recommend a member. So the opportunity for communication, the channels are available, and as they are, of course, with the select board and the identified member of the select board, who is the court, who is the representative communicating with our committee. So, you know, ideally, those channels of communication should be very helpful, and I think there's scope to work on them and improve them.
The only thing I would disagree with Bard's characterization, which is in large part that's typically the way our process works. But it's not only minor changes that the select board might make to, a zoning proposal, for example, from the planning commission. The difference between us and all other town committees is that we're elected, and we're elected by, all of the people in Richmond. And, we get a surprising amount of communication, I think, from people of all persuasions.
Sure.
Which it might be different than you folks. The people who are communicating with you folks are people who have very specific interest, in your topic. And we have a responsibility actually to represent everybody in town. So the only thing I would suggest is that, you may come to us with a particular idea, plan, thought, whatever. And you might have done a great deal of work on it. When we get it, we have to digest that, understand what it is, understand what input you have. And then it's upon us to make a decision. And very likely, we're not going to make everybody happy. And that's on us. And there are consequences for that. Elections have consequences. So that, that's not trying to suggest any particular opinion on any particular issue. It's just kind of the process, as I see it anyway.
Lisa.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, and what Bard had mentioned about the planning commission, for example, there's a lot of case law, there's a lot of regulations on the books, there's a lot of guidance, whether we like it or not, to help with making decisions. In the case of the forest in particular, I think it's a lot of intangibles that we're really trying to get our hands around. Enjoyment, pleasure, fun, respect, everybody knows what they are, but it's hard to define them. And where they should fall in priority or which ones should be left behind, I think is a really hard decision. And what you guys have done on the committee so far has really been to find a fine line between all the drop-offs. But you don't always succeed either. And we don't either here. But we don't have expertise in the kinds of things that you're doing. I think you're weighing intangibles and coming up with tangible paths. We're not quite so, up in the clouds. So I think we can learn from you. And I think together we can do a good job. I think right now I'm looking to learn from you guys, what you really need and what you see before the future pathway.
Okay, I'm looking around for any other members of the ACF or select board who want to share anything. Okay, then.
Yeah, I want to chime in. Jeff, thinking about what you're saying made me think that I think feeling like the select board really understands who we are professionally and what we bring to this committee and the real history of the work we've done would make it really much easier to trust you all to make a ultimate decision on our work. And I think my fear that I bring to this is that there will be typecast in a certain way that will take away from the collective of the expertise that the committee brings to the process and all the work and the public feedback processing that's gone on. And so I think building that trust where we feel like who we are, what we brought to this work, what we've done, and then you take it from there is what I'm hoping for from
there.
Real quick before I go to the audience, I just want to, David and Melissa, would either of you like to say anything? Good. Okay. I'm going to go to, I see a hand up and all I see is Arlo. I don't see a first name, but Arlo, yeah, you're.
It's Bob Lowe. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I'll be very brief and I will put things on chat. Longstanding Richmond resident, been involved in the Planning Commission, DRB, town planning since the 70s. I've been following this story quickly. I'm only going to comment on the authority issue that Cecilia raised, which is going to require a change in the bylaws of the Forest Committee as they stand. The current bylaws say that the committee must approve any member by a 2/3 majority. I think that's not the appropriate way to go about these things. I think the select board must have the final authority. I will come back to how I think we should approach committee memberships from the Conservation Commission and Trails Committee, but my comment mostly is about the authority of the select board. Otherwise, I like the tone and the direction of the meeting.
Hey, Bob, thank you. That actually is agenda item number 2, I believe.
2 and F.
Two
So
and F.
you hit 2 of them at once, 3, I guess.
I'll just say something. One of the differences between the planning commission and the is that the planning commission's decisions don't seem to pique the interest to the extent that ACF items do. We get email on all kinds of topics. I'm not going to, it would not be out of character for me to get an email from somebody saying that King George III is alive and well and living in Argentina, and then we need to do something about this. I mean, people have freedom of speech. They can say what they want. And sometimes on some issues, people feel very heated. And the ACF gets their share of this, I have no doubt. And so do we. We get some very diametrically opposed phone calls, and emails, and discussions in the supermarket. And it's hard sometimes to maintain one's objectivity. And as I noted recently, I didn't do a very good job of that. And I'm going to step out in front and admit that here at the beginning. This is a topic that a lot of people feel very strongly about. And I think there is room for everybody to get some of what's their way. I believe there is middle ground between a conservation only plan where we stand at the periphery of the forest and look with binoculars at the bunnies, and one where it's primarily recreation focused. There is a middle ground. And that's kind of my goal. The thing I've quoted a couple of times is the town of Richmond sometime back approved a declaration of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to many people, that comes down to the color of your skin, because that's the most obvious way it's addressed in the media. But it also includes protect the interests of other groups, the disabled, the young, the old, the visually impaired, veterans, sexuality. I mean, there's a lot of groups who we have to sort of say, are we taking their needs into account also? And so from time to time, I've tried to kind of bring that point of view. Are we doing the job we need to do to make sure that we are coming up with a plan for all Richmonders? Or are we talking more to the people who shout the loud on all sides? And so that's kind of my challenge, is to try to hear everybody, the ones who whisper and the ones who shout, and try to stay objective. And sometimes it's easier than others. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question or make a point? Okay, well, I thank you all. We, I think, are ready to move on to our second agenda item. You've heard reference made to it about how do citizens become members of the ACF committee. The ACF committee, despite what I said a couple meetings back, I was wrong when I said how it was structured. It's structured as Ian said earlier. There are 9 members. There are 9 seats. One is a direct representative from the Trails Committee. One is a direct representative from the Conservation Commission, and that's you, Daniel, right? Yep. Okay. Then there's a nominee from Trails and a nominee from Conservation, and then 5 others. And the 5 others, well, actually, pretty much all of them have to, correct me if I'm wrong, with the exception of the 2 direct delegates, all 7 do need to be approved by a 2/3 vote of the ACF committee. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if I could back up a little
Please
bit.
do, absolutely.
So when you look at the bylaws and, you know, if they're different than other committees, that was sort of whatever number F, I think we should be willing to look at them further down the line. My hope is that we can fill our committee under the current bylaws. Though you'll see in it, like, it actually says everything we decide on should be decided on a 2/3 vote, not just a simple majority, and that it included originally we were looking for like interlocking boards. So when the ACF started, it was actually governed by the Conservation Commission during its interim phase. And when the 2018 management plan came out, so did the bylaws that created this committee. And the goal was to keep trails and Conservation Commission in the loop, in conversation with each other. And originally we wanted to have 2 members from each of those committees sit on the Andrews Community Forestry. So it's a sort of interlocking board. The problem with that quickly arose that not everybody can have time to sit on 2 town committees. So we said, okay, how about one that person who's willing to sit on both, and then they can appoint a second person each committee that may or may not be on their own commission. When the bylaws got written up, it was written as, no, they're not members of the committee. They're just chosen by those committees. So that might be one thing we want to revisit if we want to stay with the structure of being 2 suggested by planning and 2 suggested by the RCC. I'm sorry, not planning, trails and the Conservation Commission. So that was, and that 2/3 vote, you'll see it on everything that it in the bylaws. The idea was that it was already identified in the very beginning that there may be these differing concerns related to trails and to environmental conservation. And so they wanted to make sure that both perspectives were present on the committee. I don't think there was any intention ever to usurp the decision-making power of the select board. I think that select board was always going to be the one that actually appoints people to those committees. And when I looked into, okay, how do the other committees do it if we're not doing it the same way others do? I was sort of asking Josh and Duncan, well, what does this committee review part mean on the town website when it says that, a call will be made for vacant positions, the committees will review them and forward candidates to the select board? It's unclear to me what that review is. Our bylaws say we're supposed to vote on it, but maybe that's not what other town committees do. And then I don't know how many, I think you, Jay, or maybe it was others, that they did not like getting just one name that we had to give a thumbs up or thumbs down to. So it'd be good to know how many candidates we should be putting forward for the select board to choose from. So it'd be good to know exactly what that committee review part is, and then how many candidates for each position you guys would like to have.
I'll turn that to Josh to start.
So in other committees, there's not bylaws like you have for the forest. So the select board in recent years has kind of adopted the tradition of having each committee review the candidates that have applied and then making suggestions to the select board, which are non-binding, they're just advisory. I'm not even sure if every committee takes an official vote. They can sort of say, of these candidates, these are the ones we feel would fit the best. And then the board can have a discussion about who they think will put that committee. With the Andrews Community Forest, as you know, it's a little different. We're in the bylaws, it's 2/3 vote supposed to come. And I am a little unclear if the committee, say you get an applicants for 2 spots, you only forward the 2 to the select board, whereas in other committees, the board would see all 10 plus the 2 that were recommended by the committee.
Right, that was my question exactly, is do you want to see everybody and our relative recommendations, pros and cons? Do you want us to highlight the top 3? There's different ways without ranking.
There's a number of options. The question came up in part because the former chair told me not, in no uncertain terms, not to solicit members for the ACF, that was their job. When we each spring, each March and April, we put out postings, multiple postings, till people are sick of seeing them, saying, for the love of God, please volunteer for town committee. And usually we do get enough people to step forward for everything from way or call, which is a thing, to having enough seats for this committee or that committee. Where the ACF was a little different was in that I was informed the ACF committee, Jesse said, really, we determine the people we will forward on. You don't need to do those letters. You don't need to solicit letters. And that was kind of a surprise to me because I thought ultimately it comes through the select board. So that was, I think, a matter that there was some confusion over. Is it appropriate for the select board to say to the town, hey, if you'd like to be on the ACF committee, please send a letter to us and to the ACF. And then the ACF can do what any other committee can do and say, well, there are 6 wonderful people here. We have 3 slots. We kind of think these three would be best. That I would be totally on board with. 'Cause That's
Okay.
essentially what every other town can do.
And
There's
that-
just not, it's not formal with any other town committee.
Right, okay, I mean, that's our intention. And when we first started this committee, we were off cycle. I think we started in November. So we're off cycle with your May recruitment. So we sent out the messages, and that may have been where the confusion came in. And we got a lot of applicants. People were like, oh my gosh, we have trouble filling seats in other committees, and we had 18 to sort out. I'm happy to do it anyway. I would love it if you guys actually, I don't know if it's Duncan or Josh would send out the announcement, even though we're off cycle again with these vacancies. That would be fine by me. And what I was going to recommend is that all the applicants, let's say we get 11, they're all reviewed by the RCC and the Trails Committee as well as us. And we all forward our favorites. Well, we all forward all of them to you, but indicate which ones we think would be good for at large and which ones the Conservation Commission would want to put forward, which one the Trail Commission or ones the Trail Commission would want to put forward. And that might be useful to you all to see if there's some overlap. Because those would be people that are acceptable to all three entities that are making recommendations. I don't know. Go ahead.
I just have a question about that as being the RCC representative of, one, it seems like we're talking about like a pretty significant outreach effort. And so if the RCC is reaching out to folks and the ACFC is reaching out to the select board we might be sort of like crossing streams a lot. So just in the spirit of efficiencies, I want to just clarify like the role of the RCC. Would the RCC review applicants that had applied to the ACFC as a potential nomination, or would they do their own outreach effort and present members to the ACFC?
Yeah, so what I'm proposing, trying to make it simpler,
Yeah.
is that the town could see outreach. I mean, obviously, any individual can say, hey, Chase, why don't you apply for this or whatever if they want to. But the announcements go out broadly from the town. The town manages those applications and then shows all three committees, the pools.
Okay.
And then we get to look at those because those will be people who are interested in the ACF
And then
from
the
multiple perspectives.
And then the RCC would say, here's our.
So for those of you in the audience wondering what's going on, this is basically called Zoom bombing. It was a problem in the early days of COVID because everybody was getting on Zoom and no one really knew how to do it. We have learned a few things from our IT providers about how to handle this. We can turn off everybody's access and then re-enable it one person at a time and therefore leave the person we don't re-enable out the cold. On the other hand, they can simply disconnect and call back in. And so, Josh, what would you think?
Well, I was trying to kick them out of the meeting, but it kept flipping back and like every time.
Different.
Yeah. Bard, try to unmute.
Say
Okay,
something.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, and can everybody else who is, right now we have everybody force muted basically, so you cannot unmute or.
But they can
share.
raise their hand.
Right, so I was gonna ask,
Right.
can you, everybody hear us? And then raise your hands if you want to speak and we can unmute you individually. So I guess maybe raise your hands if you can hear us right now. Does everybody know how to raise your hand if you go to the bottom?
Yeah, it's under reaction.
great.
Excellent.
I think we're good. So everybody put your hands down. If you do want to speak, raise your hand and I'll just have to, I'll make myself a co-host and I can probably do it from over there. Okay, so I should be able to control muting and unmuting.
Okay.
And then if that works, great. If it doesn't, we'll try something else.
And the ability to share
Thank you so
videos,
much.
What's that?
the ability to share videos is shut off.
Yeah, right now, nobody can share videos or unmute unless I let them
Okay.
unmute. At least that's my understanding of how this works. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
So if it
And-
comes back,
This is a first for me, so I'm learning.
yeah, well, that was the first time trying to deal with it.
But you were there
Weird
when?
how it Kept moving.
Okay,
Well,
I think we.
So-
That was annoying.
okay, so
That
we're
was
resume.
well, so
Wait, can I just jump in real quick? Because they can't see our video, can people at the table just say your name when you speak? And
Let's start our video.
Yeah, let's start our video.
Okay.
we don't want to share our video, no sharing.
No, we can, I think, no, we can have our video,
Just not now.
I think.
Well, they were that thing was jumping
We can-
into individuals.
That's because we,
It was.
We can do that. So we can identify ourselves.
It's easy.
It's not a bad thing to do anyway.
Let's try.
Because it's small, it's hard to see it small, even if they have our.
actually, what we should do is spotlight the town and
That's what I was gonna try to do. Oh, you mean spotlight us?
Yeah.
But then will we see the hands raised? I guess. we will,
We'll still
right?
see the hands raised in the gallery.
If we start the video,
And then spotlight the town,
where was spotlight?
No.
right click, right on, go to the town video, upper right hand corner.
Right here?
And spotlight. Spotlight for everyone.
Oops, okay.
Spotlight for everyone is 2/3.
No,
down.
there you go.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay,
All right,
Yeah.
there we go. Let's hope
I'll
nobody
put
takes
this-
that.
okay.
and if you wanna, we don't need to see it if you can, see. Well, I need to know because I can call them people. but
Yeah, but I think if everybody can put their hands down, like Joy, your hands up, Duncan, your hands up, Bob, your hands up, if you guys put your hands down, unless you really have a comment, then we can monitor for who has
Yeah,
comments.
whoever puts their hand up will then jump to the first, so we'll know, okay. Okay,
Okay, and can I just say one more thing? I'm looking at the time now and I know due to childcare, I need to leave at 9. And I know that was our scheduled end time.
Mhm.
So for this topic, we're trying to figure out how to fill those vacancies. So I think what would be helpful is not sort of go through everything we may or may not have done in the past, but really what do we need now to fill those vacancies from the perspective of the select board? So we're doing it in a legit manner because we've been critiqued for not doing that. And then we can move on to the next item. I think, I don't want to cut anybody off, but just, there's a lot of items.
okay. So right now, we have a representative from the Trails Committee nominated. It's solely the Trails Committee's vote.
So my proposal
It's
is
just to take names in.
the town just announced we have these 3 openings. And you guys help us in doing that, Josh and Duncan.
Mhm.
All the applicants referred to all 3 committees. It's my proposal. People should modify it. Each of the committees put forward their, we'll be doing the at-large, you'll be doing the Conservation Commission, you guys will be doing the trail nominees, but look at all the applicants and forward all of them to you with the recommendations, more than one, if there are more than one that are acceptable to each committee. Does that make
That's
sound good?
fine with me.
Yeah, my only question would be if one is going to be the representative from a committee, like from the RCC, does the RCC determine that person or does the select board choose?
That would be
from-
the RCC.
Okay, so the RCC can just say, we want this person and
Right.
it doesn't get a vote.
I think so, because
Okay.
you've already been approved as a committee member for the town. That would
Okay.
have been my.
I just wanted to
recommendation.
clarify, just so we,
Perfect.
yeah.
Well, just so this extra layer that relates to applicants coming via the other 2 committees. The normal format is that an applicant writes a letter to the select board explaining why they want to be on the specific committee. In this situation, it would be very helpful to our committee to have an additional recommendation coming from the respective committee, the commission or the committee, explaining why they are putting forward their preferred applicant.
Okay, I think that's a reasonable path forward. I know Duncan and Josh exist, but things on first word forum. So that should not, no, we like to volunteer Duncan, we're waiting to see what he will say no to.
Well, the only question is, because it's in the bylaws, should our committee be voting on all 3 positions being sent to the select board, or should we just be silent and just
As the bylaws
focus
are
on
currently
the?
written, we need a 2/3 vote. from
Okay.
that.
I'm not quite sure that's true. I'm sorry, Jeff. but-
Okay, go ahead, Julian.
The bylaws say that the committee is gonna have 7 to 9 members with appointments approved by the Richmond Select Board. The only thing we need 2/3 majority for is picking a chair.
I think it says, I think if you look further down, yeah.
Or That's renewal replacement.
These are the bylaws.
That's essentially what we're doing.
Yeah, my thing keeps turning off.
But
Annoying.
Okay, well. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Josh.
so normally they,
I was just sharing.
2I,
oh, good.
If anybody wanted to
Right.
see.
it's that, and then there's 2I.
The committee
Down a little bit
chair,
further.
yeah, but then you go down for the
Replacement.
replacement renewal. It's
3.
double I.
But this is not written in strict Vermont state statute legalese in terms of what is a retirement. Does it mean somebody says, I'm out of here, or does it just mean they termed out and didn't want to be out? We're taking that to essentially mean anybody who leaves the ACF for whatever reason would then need to be replaced with nomination and a 2/3 vote.
Yeah.
That's how it currently stands. That's something that we could look into changing in the future if we feel like it, if that's a good idea. Right now, it does seem a little bit complicated, but in the short term, we do need 3 members.
And so it says a nomination of a new member accepted by the ACF committee. I'm suggesting that we nominate as many people as we feel are acceptable and not just one per seat, if that's okay. That would give you guys,
I have no objection to that. David, Josh, Bard, Lisa, Jeff.
I would prefer it. So, you know, the thing that's different about this than every other committee is no other committee has kind of veto authority over who gets to us,
right,
right? That's what's different. So the planning commission might have a vacancy and we solicit, you know, volunteers to fill that. And then we review all the volunteers and then we make a selection.
so the way I'm suggesting it, you guys would see all the applicants, so it's not like we're vetoing.
That'd
You
be-
guys are the ones that make the appointment.
And-
I think the intention was never to take away authority from the select board, but rather to keep that 2/3 thing going so that multiple views are.
Yeah, it's not just the authority, it's the number of applicants.
Right.
The variety of applicants, so that, you know, this, I think we can accomplish both B and F. By this would be an area where we want to review in the bylaws.
So Cecilia, we would send all the applications with, and also recommendations along with that.
Yeah, so I think and a select board should tell us what you want to see, but I'd imagine you would want to see all the recommendations. You would want all the applications. You would want to see which one the Trails Committees thought would meet their criteria, which ones Conservation Commission would meet theirs. And then the ACF has to also say which ones they think would be good. And then the ACF, if we follow this, we're supposed to vote both on what Trails and Conservation Commission forwards to us. So it is cumbersome, but maybe we can do that fairly quickly. I'm hoping within a month.
I think we can get people to you very quickly because there's a lot of interest in the town. And I know we can get a posting and virtually the next day's FPF. And then your next meeting would be scheduled for.
The 28th, it would be great if we could be reviewing applications.
Right, I don't
28th,
see the
but I
reason
don't,
why we shouldn't be able to get you some names. Will we have the name of everybody? If we say, speak now, for please don't dither.
the question is, if we're gonna vote after Trails and
Right.
Conservation Commission at least considers, they're not required to vote. I don't know if you guys would consider holding special meetings just for this, even remotely, or are they allowed to hold remote
You
meetings
can hold remote, just has to be warned.
with a 4 days warning?
Is it for Josh or?
No, I think it's 24 hours for a special meeting.
We just try to err on the side of more for obvious democratic reasons, but
Okay,
yeah, if it was a matter of, we have these names, Trails needs to vote, RCC needs to vote, warn it. It can be, the law still entirely allows for entirely Zoom under.
Yep, you can still do entirely Zoom.
That may go away in the future, but for now it's still an option. So you could warn a Zoom meeting. It could be a 15-minute meeting. And then have those names to you by the 28th.
great. And if it can't be, then we can always hold a special meeting too, to make sure it gets through quickly.
And so Cecilia, for that open seat, who votes?
The ACFC will be voting on all 3 seats. But I think we'll be all looking at the same one. So it may turn out that like there might be 1 or 2 superstars that all 3 groups want, then that's good for the select board to know that might be a crossover candidate. But
Okay, so I think we've got a way forward, and I'm gonna, in the interest of time, because Cecilia does have a compelling reason to not be here half the time. I think we can probably say that sounds like a plan. Now, as far as revisiting this issue, say, you know, when, let's say in October, November, when we have nothing else going on, certainly not the budget. We could say, do we want to look into a bylaw change? But right now, tonight, we don't need one. We just have a way
Right.
forward.
And I just wanted to note, when I looked at the bylaws, there's some typos, formatting errors. I think we should look at the bylaws regardless.
Right.
And this is one of the things we should look at it for.
Okay. Cool. Okay, our next agenda item is keeping lines of communication open. I'm going to quote the official agenda item: process and practices for keeping select board and the ACFC committee mutually up to date and lines of communication open.
And I think we were adding that, Ian and I, because I know there's been a lot of back and forth between individual select board members and the public and the chairs of ACFC I didn't know the extent of that until I was interim chair. So in order to be clear, so you can answer to your constituencies, is there something that would be helpful to you all to be writing you guys a little one-page report after every meeting, saying here are the highlights, so you don't have to go through the minutes? Or is there some other, what would be helpful for you all to hear from us, so you feel like you can answer your constituency when they contact you? And then for us, it would be nice to know what you're hearing. And whether we can distribute that, like if a single person contacts Jay or sends an email to Jay and he forwards it to the committee chair, then can the committee chair send it to the whole committee, or are we somehow violating privacy? So we just have to be super clear on how to do that.
If I get an email, if I get an email and it's not on scheduling or agenda or administrative stuff, it's actually on content, and I forward it, and I'm not a member of the ACF committee, and people simply take note of it, but don't reply to one another, I believe, Josh, tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe at that point we're okay. If the ACF starts replying to it among themselves, at that point, if more than 4 of them are replying to each other and the other 5 aren't involved, you'd be okay. But if the whole 9 are talking back and forth, that's breaking open meeting.
Right, but we're super clear on that.
Yeah. I'm just saying kind of to the audience.
Yeah, that's clear. The question is, there's lots of communication going on, and how can we know what you're being bombarded with and vice versa?
One of them is, you all have been doing your meetings via Zoom, and they have been being recorded, but they have not been making their way to MMC TV. And for example, Josh, one of the things he's doing over there is every time we change a subject, he's making a note of the exact time that happened. So that then when MMCTV puts the video up on their website, if you've gone to their site, I'm president of the board for MMCTV. I'm not, just so everybody knows. I think the MMCTV does a great job by putting the video up and saying for each agenda item, go to this exact minute mark if you want to know about that topic. That would go a long way, because then if we're curious about a particular topic, we just go to the MMCTV website, click the link, boom. That way we don't have to sit through the whole thing. But other than that, just a summary, an executive summary that could be sent would also be helpful. But Lisa, you have your hand up. What do
You said
think?
quarterly?
Yeah, something I wanted to see for a long time was some kind of recognition for the various committees we have. And we haven't been able to come up with anything. And the reason is time, partly. It's a scattered population. But really, maybe that addresses 2 things. You guys getting an opportunity in live, real time to ask questions of the board, not just report out, but you got a burning question that your committee has come up with. Lay it on the table here. We'll talk about it. Maybe we won't solve it, but we'll have a dialogue going. Maybe 5 minutes or something is all you would need to update us for the next month or 4 or 2 weeks. We don't need a whole year's.
So like a standing committee report at the select board meeting.
Yeah.
Every month or 2 or 3? No.
Instead of having to write it out and distribute it and all this stuff, which, is hit
You
or
can
miss.
just agendize
Face
it.
to face, real time
Okay,
allows, at least me, I think of questions when I hear something, or I don't think of questions, but if I do, then I gotta write them down. I gotta send them to Jay, they're gonna get lost somewhere, probably in my mind.
Yeah, but that's very much how the ARPA committee, when we were much more active, the ARPA committee has no decision-making power of its own. It exists merely to recommend.
Right.
And so we would say, here's what we're thinking.
Yeah, just throw it out there and.
Same with the planning commission, really. The planning commission was very good about saying, no, we're not in a state to vote on this yet, but here's where we're going. So it doesn't have to be monthly. It could be every meeting. I mean, honestly, we could find room in the agenda every meeting for 10 minutes if that's what you want.
Yeah.
If you want it every 6 meetings, we can do that too. It's just whatever happens to be important.
We have an
Both
outlier.
sides feel informed.
right.
No.
I could see it not being part of the meeting also, but just being a liaison connection. And it does seem like there'd be some value in it being a person to person, so that both sides could learn from the other. But it should be monthly, because like, for example, this last month, we presented a trail stewardship plan and significant revisions based on feedback that we got from our public engagement meeting. And so at this point, the status of the overall plan is updated from last time. Probably you all have seen it, right? And so discussions that you would be having might not take into account the most current version, right? When I think some of the stuff that has been brought up in public as lacking is in there now. And so it seems like a face-to-face, that then it would be, there need to be a share out from the liaison to the rest of the committee.
That's, I was trying to get away from like an individual liaison thing, because what if Ian is liaising with Jeff and then somebody asks a question of Lisa and she doesn't know? So I just
Right.
thought if it was just 5 minutes once a month or every other
think
month or whatever.
It's very hard to keep things to 5, especially a question. But honestly, I think as steward of the agenda, and we're trying to keep them shorter, but this is valuable. This is worth spending some time on. So I think if we have a report out at least once a month, or at least 10, but it could be more if there's important stuff to discuss. And of course, you can always point us to, you can say, now, this is not such the entire thing. This is also on MMCTV's meeting link. Go to 1 hour and 10 minutes, and you can hear the entire thing here. And here is the digested minutes of that. But the 10-minute would be the executive summary to kind of tell us what we're even should be thinking about. Because if we don't know to go to MMCTV and go to the 1 hour and 10-minute mark, well, it's tautological. We don't know what we don't know.
And I'm guessing that over time, we may want to do it every other month if there's nothing that lively, or decide that we have to be every meeting or something like that. I mean, we can adjust in going forward with that. Go ahead, Jeff.
So, I would respectfully disagree. That, there have been many times this past year when I haven't gotten home till midnight. And 5 minutes turns into 15, and we'll have 20 items on our agenda, and you
Wow.
just do the math. No, I'm not criticizing. I'm not criticizing.
Why do you
Dave.
feel criticized?
No, I'm
just
not.
saying,
I'm
as
not.
a- Go ahead.
So, what my suggestion would be, I think the analogy to the planning commission is a really good one, because what you're doing is planning. And in the course of planning, you come up with many iterations. We don't need to see all of the iterations.
Mhm.
The planning commission has spent literally 2 years on the last zoning revision,
Mhm.
and it changes every meeting. And we don't need to know all of the, updates at every particular meeting. You only meet once a month, right? That's
Correct, yeah.
my understanding. So if you were to come once a month, we would be getting an update on each of your meetings.
Right, that's where there's, again, the happy medium thing. We don't want to have an update just to have an update. If there's ever a situation where there literally is something newsworthy to report 2 meetings in a row, okay. But not, as Jeff said, no one wants to be getting out of here at midnight. I've been trying recently, but I was actually very pleased last meeting we got.
I really appreciate it. And you're doing it, you're doing a good job of trying to, keep us on task. But I would suggest that, rather than whenever there's an important burning issue, that if you knew that, you were going to be reporting 5 to 15 minutes, 15 minutes is a long agenda item for us, 5 to 15 minutes, a status report quarterly, that would keep us up to date on what you're doing. It would be something that you would know. And if there's something in between those quarters that was, imminent and urgent that you needed our advice on, that's fine.
Mhm.
But, quarterly would bring us, to October?
Mhm.
And something like that.
Okay, before we move on, can I?
Bart handed, I was about to call it. Bart, could you unmute and go ahead?
Yeah, I was pondering and have pondered numerous times in the past this question of liaison of a select board person to committees. And I see that as somewhat more fraught than it would appear from the outside. So there's 5 select board members. We're often torn in different ways. And at the end of the day, we're only one person, and we're basically precluded from updating all the other members separate from public meeting. So what I've just seen, to put this out there, is perhaps some greater hope for the functionality of a select board liaison to committees than I actually see occurring. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Right, to sum up, what I think I'm hearing is report to us at least once a quarter, but if there's something especially newsworthy, report more often and try to keep it brief. And if we can, get the videos up in MCTV with bookmarks so that we can make it easier for us to bring ourselves up to date.
Okay,
And MCTV is ready when you are. They can take a Zoom recording, and it's nice if we have the minute by minute, this topic was at this time, but if not, we can somebody can generate that.
Before we move on, is there anybody else from the ACFC? I feel like I've been doing all the speaking that have any opinion on this.
Well, I would add one thing, which is that when you all get those emails that you were talking about, and you get thoughts or comments about our process, then I would invite you to wait for that liaison moment before discussing that here, so that there's an opportunity to interact and we can get that.
That makes
back
sense.
and forth going.
That makes sense.
Now, there will be some emails that are sent to us that are that explicitly say, please do not share, but the ones that are, why I want my 2 cents. I think it'd be actually fairly reasonable for those of us in the select board to say, is this something that you would feel comfortable having shared? And if somebody doesn't want it shared, then it's kind of like, well, then why are you telling me? Because I can't act on it. I mean, these should be. I think the period of trying to talk to mom and dad and say, well, mom, yeah, and all this behind the scenes politicking that we've had to deal with, I don't think that's helping a lot. And I think the more out in the open things are, the better. Yeah. So if somebody writes to me and says, don't share this, my question is going to be, what do you want to do? Okay. So I'd like to encourage more openness, but I'm not telling anybody in town, if you have a burning desire to tell me something or any select board member something, and you don't want it shared, you have that right. You can also, if you really don't want it to be, you can always call. But otherwise, I think this idea quarterly and more often if we need to, and get the meetings up on MCT, I think that sounds like a plan.
Okay, and we'll follow the same lead. If we get emails, sometimes they go just to the chair. Typically, we send them out to the whole committee. Unless someone says don't share. I guess I'm hearing that legally
Don't share is very fraught because legally anybody can put in a Freedom of Information Act request and say, I want to know what was communicated with you on this topic during this time frame. That the only way that's pretty much FOIA proof is a phone call or meeting in the grocery store. People have a right to know what's going on. That's why we always want to err on the side of having things as public as possible. So the members of the public don't go, gee, I wonder what I'm missing.
Okay, or members of our committees.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is it something that we want to open to the public or move on?
Yeah, I'm looking to the public members of the room on the Zoom. Any comments?
I just want to reinforce the use of Mount Mansfield TV and the committee using that, because taking minutes at a meeting, it's a Herculean task for anybody, and especially when it's contentious. I think you have to, as a member of the public, want to be able to see what was actually said rather than as it was interpreted by any one member who happened to be the secretary. And recognizing that that's a very difficult job under any circumstances. But
Ma'am, I apologize. One thing for the minute. Your name is
Nancy Zimney.
Nancy
Zimney.
Zimney. Okay.
So
Duncan,
we'll
you got that?
check in with you, Josh, about how
Okay.
to get our Zoom stuff. to
Yeah, just reach out to
MMB
Ruth or
and-
Aaron or just,
Okay,
I will have them contact you
perfect.
if they don't do it already. Okay, any other comments from the public? Okay, our next item, status report on Andrews Community Forest activity. I just want to do a time check. It is right now 8:01. We have status report, staff support for the ACF plan, revisions, maps, trails, etc. Plans to revisit the bylaws, role of zoning and the DRB, review of open regulations and other. So in terms of the next hour, status report, what you need from us to manage the revisions and maps and so forth. And zoning and DRB are probably the 3 biggest topics, I would say. So let's go ahead and go to item D, status report.
Sure, and this was meant to be short, and I'll tell you everything we've done in the past, however many years. But mostly, Chase already cut to the chase, in that everybody's aware that we had, I was on one of the drafting committees with Daniel and Amy when she was still on the committee that sort of tried to put in a lot of revisions. We released a revised plan that included the trail plan. We had a public meeting. I think that was in March. We got more feedback and things got a little bit stalled after that. We just want to acknowledge that and have and let people know that we are moving forward now. When Nick was chair, he set up an additional 2 committees, one that's looking just at plan revisions and one is that is writing companion piece, it's sort of a trail stewardship plan, because we realized that much of the feedback we were hearing about the trails plan and concerns about it, some of that, not all of it, can be addressed in how those trails are built out over time, how we monitor use and impacts, how we close it seasonally, what rules we have for use, who can ride a bike on a trail, on one part of trail, or only walk on another part of trail. So Chase and Caitlin had worked on a trail stewardship plan to really try and bring those public comments over the past year or so into a thing to talk about how we would be managing trails. So we haven't fully finished that conversation, but also Melissa and Julius, right? And Ian have been working, Julian, sorry. It's right there on your sign, have been looking at the whole management plan and what additional changes are needed in that. I'll just leave it there for now. I have another historical point to note, but I'll just see if anybody else on the committee wants to provide current status so that the select board knows where we're at.
I think that covered it.
Yeah, I would just say, if any of you select board members haven't had a chance to watch the recording of the March 29th public engagement in its entirety, Nick did a great job of, he put together a presentation going through the whole history of public engagement and how that data was synthesized and incorporated. And then we also collected feedback at the end of that engagement meeting, and that informed this last round of changes. So there was some qualitative data analysis from first public engagement, and then this is another round of edits based on that, and communication with you all as well. And so I feel like that recording plus what we are working on now will be a good representative of kind of the whole process.
When was that made? Sorry, when was that video made?
March, end of March.
Yeah, I think March
Yeah,
29th.
March 29th, plan revisions and public. And I want to add,
It's on MMC TV.
I don't know if we marked the times as you're discussing.
Sometimes not required, it's just.
Yeah, I think we're gonna do that. I just want to add, and we just want to recognize that this much anticipated by at least our committee and perhaps the public opportunity for feedback in March. We hired a facilitator to help us who worked with that beforehand. We collected questions beforehand to make sure we could answer them all. I realized it didn't achieve our full goal in being able to have a conversation. It was more like a call response kind of thing, or and not as much responding or real dialogue as people had wanted. And we totally recognize that. And as we move forward, as with these two pieces, the revised plan and then a trail stewardship plan, we hope to have in place a way to have better dialogue around that. We did our best. We did what we could, hiring someone, vetting various people, the contract, planning it. In the end, it didn't work out, at least as I had hoped. And I know I've heard from other folks, they felt like they still haven't had their voices heard. So I want you to know that we're going to make room for that moving forward, but try and do it quickly because, or at least efficiently, because people have been concerned at the speed at which it's taking us, which gets us onto another agenda item.
Okay, so questions or thoughts, Jeff?
So in preparing for this meeting, one of the things I did is I read the two, Melissa Levy's report, that had a bunch of, it listed the public comment. And I also read the one from a year previously, that I think Caitlin and Nick put together. And they took all of the public comment and then they sorted it and listed it in different sections.
Right.
I found that very helpful. That was for me, that was a really useful way to synthesize, I think it was like 30 pages of stuff down into like 12, and it was very helpful. And I would really appreciate if you would do that process of, trying to make people feel like that all of their voices are heard. Because in reading both of those, it's not conclusive. There is a variety of viewpoints and there isn't a resolution.
Exactly.
If I could point out, the reason I think we didn't get to that section you're talking about, Cecilia, I was at that meeting is because everybody wanted to get up to the microphone so that
Yeah.
and be heard. So, people want that audience. And I think it's one of the reasons we didn't get to the tables that you guys have designed and have talked about. So, I mean, it wasn't like,
We just had to make a decision
Yeah,
between
on the fly.
right.
more questions for the panel versus small group discussion, and the panel was rolling and people.
And we had,
Sorry, but just the other thing I wanted to say is that I think you'll find that in the next version of the plan that we've been working on in the subcommittees, that a lot of the concerns that were raised there are really, I think, pretty squarely addressed in the modifications that we've been making lately. So I'm looking forward to seeing your reaction to those.
Great.
Okay, I'm gonna call on Judy. Judy,
Oh, yeah. We need that.
you need to unmute Judy, or actually, we need to give you permission to unmute. Hold on. There you go.
There you go.
You're all set.
Thank you. Yes, that was, I wasn't sure how to communicate to you. So in regard to public comment, I do agree that the points that Jeff just made are valid, but there was a whole period of public comments that were input to the ACFC prior to that, the more deliberate efforts to collect public comment that were a bit more anarchistic in their, I don't know how to say, documentation and response. And I think some public frustration came from people who made thoughtful comments and didn't know what happened to those. So I just want to point that out. And I'm not pointing a finger of blame. I'm just making noises of appreciation towards this movement towards a more organized collection and response of public input.
Thank you, Judy. Any other thoughts from members of the ACS of the Select Board? Comments from the public here in the room or online? If you're online and want to speak, please raise your hand and we will allow you to unmute.
Yeah, I would,
Introduce you, Fred Elliott.
Brad Elliott, sorry. Yeah, I would just basically support what Judy said. You know, she talked about collection and response. There's been a ton of collection, but it's the response, it's the dialogue, you know. I mean, I keep hearing us fall back on the phrase of people worried that their voices aren't being heard. I think our voices have been heard. I can't, help that people can't help but hear them, but they just fall into an abyss and there's no response. There's no dialogue. You ask a question, people go away, they quote, compile, edit everything, and it comes back in a very kind of a bland form. And there's a lot of nuggets get lost in some of those summaries. So I think it's great that if you talk about, opening up for dialogue, just being able to sit the way the select board does. I'm constantly impressed the way discussions happen in this room over some, really weighty matters. So I think it's good.
Thank you, Fred. Any other comments from anybody in the back corner, back row, online? Okay.
I just add one thing. I know Ian has been compiling some of the full comments that you might be talking about and maps. There's been a lot of stuff submitted to the committee over time. So my hope is that we have kept all those and we can look at those as we, consider these two pieces now, the revised management plan and the trail stewardship plan, to make sure that we remember those and we're taking that into account as we try to come up with solutions that might address them. But then again, to open it up to a dialogue, because we don't claim to have all the best answers about how to resolve issues, especially when, as we pointed out, there's very different views on what the next step should be.
So question, how do you solicit dialogue? So like the way we have done it, for better or worse, is we'll have an agenda item. Then the chair, whether it be Jay or any of our previous chairs, will say, do the select board have any questions? And then that'll open up to the public. Do any of the public have any questions about this particular issue? And it's kind of real time,
right,
back and forth on any particular issue.
Until recently, we haven't done that. We tended to either have public comment at the beginning or more likely at the end, beginning helps us know what people are thinking as we go to proceed. The end, people get a chance to respond what we've been talking about, but we haven't had that back and forth in the meeting. Under our last chair, as we revisited what we need to do to move forward, we decided to do that. So that was a practice that Nick started in the last one. So that's something we plan to continue because I think everybody's happy with that, more real-time feedback. That said, I think we might have relied too much on people responding to agenda items that might have been out for only a few days before the meeting. People justly complained that they didn't have enough time to prepare or maybe couldn't have planned to participate in the meeting. I think once we get these documents together, we should have a conversation about how to have them out for a while. So people have a few weeks to look at them and then figure out a way through dialogue, we can get feedback and look at how to modify it. Because we ended up, Caitlin and Nick did that table because we were getting so many different, input from different places. It was a chance to consolidate that. And in preparation for this meeting and afterwards, we had like a Google Doc or something where people could insert information. So there were those two things, and then whatever people could squeeze in at a meeting. I think we're going to modify things slightly going forward so that we can make sure people can comment on each agenda item and there's some dialogue about and longer time to review the products that come out.
The pluses and minuses of the process that I'm suggesting is that it can string out the meetings longer.
Yeah.
And so I would suggest, limiting public comment for each of those agenda items to 2 minutes an individual, to try to, keep on, and then everyone who wants to comment on that item first, can do before you go to a second round. And I think that goes a long ways toward people feeling like, there's been a dialogue, there's been a back and forth. Whether you agree with whatever is said or not, at least, feels like you get heard.
Can I ask a question, as the new guy? So Brad mentioned, the compilation, you thought it was useful. I thought it was useful too, that compilation. Do other committees do that? Does the select board do that? Does the trails and conservation committees, are there other ways of capturing and categorizing feedback that make it more digestible that we can also take on?
The best example I've got is ARPA.
Okay.
We held a number of public forums. And it was just totally, we will write down whatever you say. If you say you want us to buy an aircraft carrier with ARPA money, we will write that down. And then we mostly me, but everybody on the committee had a chance to say, I don't agree with your summary. We went through and said these 17 different suggestions all basically boil down to we want a pickleball court. And so then we grouped them by category and said, so we have this many recommendations for this many for this many for this. It's a completely unscientific way to do it because we don't know how many people just couldn't come to those meetings that night. But to kind of look at the ideas and say, this particular idea was stated by 7 people, this was by 4, this was by 3. That's one way. That's kind of the way the ARPA committee did it because we had 300 plus suggestions. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds familiar.
I really heard Jeff's comments appreciating the 2 surveys that were used recently and then last March to solicit input in written form. And personally, I really value, and I think Jeff was saying, value the fact that these were written comments on the record and furthermore compiled by initially a member of the committee and then subsequently the facilitator, compiled into a way that identified themes, and that was really helpful to have it written and to have it compiled into themes.
And one of the challenges that we've faced, which I'm sure you do as select board members also, is that we've had certain public engagement forums where people have showed up and they may be the whisperers, like you were saying, rather than the louder voices. And they've voiced once or twice their opinion, but they haven't showed up to all the subsequent meetings. And how do we give that equal weight to the voices that are showing up and are louder and are more verbose? And so I don't know the answer, but I think one of the challenges that I see is I sense people are frustrated that they've been here all the time participating. They're asking, they're voicing their preferences and we're trying to balance it all. And I don't know the best way to do that, but we're trying to keep it democratic where if you did show up and voice your thoughts at the public forums, that doesn't get watered down because you don't show up at every meeting.
Well, if I may, I think that not everybody can come to a meeting in the evening. Some people work. That's one of the reasons that I think I've gotten a lot of spirited comments from various people because I'm trying to quote them without assigning whether I know they're telling the truth or not, but they say, I can't come to the meetings, but maybe once every 9 months. And I'm told that since I can't be there every time, my words count for less. That's the problem because, well, that goes back to the equity and inclusion. Somebody who can't drive at night and who doesn't understand computers. We have a lot of people in town who don't drive after dark and who don't get computers, and they're basically out.
Yeah,
so that's the
parents.
problem. Yeah, well, not just parents, but a lot of the elderly. One of the biggest drivers between moving the select board, the town meeting from Monday night back to Tuesday was all the people who just couldn't come. They just don't drive after dark. Yeah. And so that is the issue, is because that's a population who have lit my email box up saying, I'm terrified of what might happen out there on the trail, but I can't come to the meetings. How do I make my voice heard? And that's the tricky part, because we would all like to hear from everybody. It's very hard to take into account everybody, but we have to try.
And I think that's what you were saying, James. That not, yeah.
I think that the better or a good analogy is the planning commission and the zoning. Zoning is a very hot topic and it's really tedious and it takes a long time. You know, I mean, if you were to talk to Virginia Clark, the chair of our planning commission, you can't believe how many hours she's put into the zoning revisions for one zone. It's amazing. And it's the only way it can work is that this process of trying to be inclusive is time consuming. And yet if you don't do it, you cannot reach consensus. So I understand the drive towards efficiency and the frustration over the length of time that this is all taken. But it's just going to have to be because there are so many different divergent voices, and it's a better outcome if we come out of this process with a plan that maybe not everybody agrees upon, but they don't want to strangle each other.
So that's the challenge. And if anybody has the answer to that, the Nobel Peace Prize Committee is on speed dial. Just, let us know. We'll nominate you. But it's a goal. It's one of those goals that is hard to ever fully reach because there's so many obstacles, but it's something to strive for. John?
I'll echo what Jeff said. I think one of the reasons it's taken 2.5 years or 3 years to get to this point is the fact that we were rushing. And doing that meant every meeting skipping over to taking the time to have the substantive discussions about each element, getting some, you're not going to get consensus, but hopefully you get some informed consent and you can nail down a few things so that there's fewer variables out there that people keep questioning. So I just encourage that as far as looking to the future, developing a plan and a schedule for discussing these things that is respectful of the committee members and respectful of the public. The big meeting last March, there was a lot of work went into putting together the plans, to putting things up on a website where people could respond. And the management plan that was put up was the wrong plan. When the correct plan was put up, there wasn't an announcement saying, oh, the old plan was up there first, here's the new plan. People were submitting comments on, we're not sure which plan. It muddied the data
you could, you know, all the stuff that came out of it was hard to analyze. And in part because there was the rush to get the thing done by someone picked a date on a calendar rather than figured out working backwards from, you know, here's what we need to do. Here's how many weeks we need to, you know, to put together a report. Here's how many weeks we need to analyze a report. Just working with a planner, hopefully maybe our town planner, to develop the plan that will get you to a solid, a solid management plan and trail plan with public buy-in. Thank you, John Cart. Citizen.
I was just gonna say that jumps us to that's exactly where I wanted to go with the next agenda item. If we can get there, and of course
Okay, so the next agenda item, staff support for the ACF committee management plan revisions, NAV and trail stewardship plan. And by staff support, I mean Josh and Duncan and that kind of people, or
Keith.
Or Keith.
Or Keith. So,
Right. Right.
Again, some of the things that John just mentioned in terms of helping us plan out, I think I don't know if everybody fully realizes, but what we're doing is a full management plan revision, which we were supposed to look at and consider every 5 years. Well, it's been 5 years, even though we started 2 years ago. So, you know, there's a lot to look at. This is not the way we do. We also have regular day-to-day business of easements that come up and issues that come up to deal with it. So this is sort of on top that hopefully once we get this revision done, we won't have to spend that amount of time on it. But to do it right, I agree with John that we should have, you know, a schedule with, you know, dates by which certain things are reviewed and available. Part of the problem, having served on one of those drafting committees, is as a all volunteer committee, we're being basically staffed to our own committee. So we're not just a deliberative body bringing together people and considering these ideas, but then we're doing all the writing and drafting and editing. And I have to thank Daniel. He went through with a fine-tooth comb on the management plan earlier. And we made a decision then not to try to change everything because we wanted to be clear what we're changing in this particular revision. So there's lots of ways that management plan could be improved. And to point out, when we did this the very first time, we were under a legal deadline from the feds to have a management plan in place a year after we took possession of the land. And so we had a chair who just dug in and did most of that work as a staff person and wrote everything and threw in the kitchen sink, which is one reason why with appendices, it's over 300 pages. So we would love to get to a better, more nimble, easy to use document, but that takes a lot of our own time. So a couple of ideas I had was just that, you know, how do other committees deal with that issue of staffing the sort of writing parts of it? We also lost Caitlin and Nick. Caitlin in particular was doing a lot of the mapping for us. And there are specific maps we still don't have, even though we've wanted for a while. How do we get that done? Hannah did all those, the previous chair or the very first chair did all those on her own as well. So we need help with all of those things. I had an idea that maybe some of these committees, in order to facilitate public input, might not be just composed of ACFC members, but we might invite other people from the community that are knowledgeable, that might have been contributing information or have the right skills. So we'd have little subcommittees to help with, you know, drafting the final document that might include staff, other townspeople, as well as our ACFC members. I don't know if I'm assuming that's allowed as long as they're not making decisions and it doesn't violate open meeting laws, but that might be one way to utilize all the knowledge and time and energy and skills in this town to help us move forward on this.
Okay, so I'm going to start by saying the answer to these questions is not Josh does it because we told him to stop doing everything. But Josh, do you have any ideas on it?
Well, you asked about how other committees do it, you know, so like planning commission, they have, you know, the town planners assigned to them to help them kind of guide through, which Virginia does a lot of work herself too. You know, DRB has the staff member as well, with Tyler. We could look in and see how much time, I mean, Keith might be a logical person, and there's sort of a planning document, he might be able to help out. But I don't want to commit his time right now, but let's have a conversation with him and see what he might be able to, what you're looking for, what he might be able to add in.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I guess, two things. Firstly, the two subcommittees have been mentioned, but simply Nick Rusty put in place as chair, and that's a very efficient mechanism for working on the management plan, because things happen between monthly meetings, and those two subcommittees have made a really phenomenal start, I think, on getting the new ideas and public opinion into proposals for the management plan. Now, that's good. The challenge, the thing actually that scares me for the next 3 years, I'm a member of this committee, and in the short term, we're going to want to incorporate the work of those subcommittees into the management plan, and that is potentially a huge task. And I've heard a suggestion actually from outside the committee that there might be resources even at the University of Vermont or other places where we could recruit somebody who would take on the task of incorporating what's been written by subcommittees into the management plan to help us get the review. So yeah, I'd really like to be able to keep an open mind about options for getting outside of the committee assistance.
And that's what, yeah, I forgot to mention the idea of maybe paid people who aren't town staff, but and who aren't volunteering, that can actually get something done. And the way like the field naturalist program from UVM works is you pay them a nominal fee and then they help do a plan. They actually did work on our first one. It was of mixed value because it was it has to be done within a semester for them, and they couldn't do a full year of wildlife surveys that you need to catch seasonality, things like that. But there are, yeah, the other option would be to pay people to help support the committee.
And we do have money in the budget for certain purposes, money that was unspent for other purposes that can be reallocated. If the goal is to get the work done and we have money and somebody is out there who's willing to take that money, I don't particularly have a problem with that. But I'm just one member of the select board. There's also, of course, ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would support all of that. One suggestion I might make is to, talk to Vermont Land Trust too, their partner. They're in this, they might either have resources or know of resources that might be helpful. And I would strongly suggest, before you commit to spending any money on anybody for anything, that you figure out what that is and then come to us first.
Oh, yeah.
That would be
I
good.
heard that.
Yeah. But, I think what you'll find is you'll find us being very receptive. This is clearly an important issue to the town, and we want to be supportive. So.
Thank you.
I'll just add quickly, the Conservation Reserve Fund still exists. It will be getting a lot more money in the coming years with the new townwide appraisal. And that could be used for a consultant that could handle developing schedules, staffing meetings, and doing the work, compiling reports.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a good time to announce it, but by interim chair, co-chair, it's very interim. Like I have other responsibilities and I really would like to have passed on these responsibilities in the next 6 weeks, if at all possible. So, and I realize how chairs in the past have carried a lot of that writing and almost staffing their own committees. So any help for the next chairs would be helpful. Mm-hmm. It would help us, I think, get people to volunteer to do it.
How do you select a chair? Do we select the chair? Or
we did, but they would normally, our committee normally elects its own chair.
I think, right?
Yeah.
For this committee, yep.
The select board kickstarted it to give them a chair to then continue.
I'm so sorry, Bard, go ahead.
Do you have to?
Thanks. Yeah, so I just want to reinforce the idea, especially for past or projects that are heavily one-time to get the committee and plan from point A to point B, and then that a lot of the work is complete at that point. That kind of thing is really rational for a contractor because it's not forever. And to sort of strengthen Jeff's point, I think the key thing is to be clear about scope of work, and then to be aware of our procurement policies that relate to that. In light of some other competing projects, it seems like maybe a contractor or contracted staff from either an existing organization or even RFP probably makes sense.
Who's the best person to make sure we're following the town rules correctly? Josh?
I can help you with that.
Thank you.
Okay, Bob, we unmute Bob. Arlo.
Yep.
Okay, Bob, go ahead.
Still muted.
You'll need to unmute.
So he needs to.
Bob, you would need to unmute now.
Sorry about that. I want to iterate what Cecilia said about the Field Naturalist program. They could very well contract these things. I want to remind you of the Meredith Naughton report from the Field Naturalist program, which provided a detailed assessment of the forest, and maybe they could follow that up. Cecilia, you would have to answer the question as to what's in the possibility for the Field Naturalist. And then I want to iterate what somebody said, Conservation Commission, Conservation Reserve Fund should be considered. Thank you.
And next semester, I'm teaching a course in community-based conservation. So they're undergraduates, but the service learning course. So if there's something, they've helped remove invasive species in the past on this forest and elsewhere. But if there's something they can do in terms of collecting and collating public comment or helping take notes in a meeting, that's a nice group of people will be available in the next few months.
Mapping?
Yeah, okay, good idea. Okay, any thoughts from the public that is not otherwise spoken of? Anybody in the room want to chime in? Okay, time check, it is 8:34. We turn into pumpkins in 26 minutes, it's not sooner. Our next item is plans to revisit the bylaws, and I just would like to volunteer that I don't see that as an instant, we must do it tomorrow kind of thing, but as Cecilia said, there are some typos, there are some grammatical errors, and we might want to at some point look at the appointment method, but speaking only for myself, I think that is not something that has to be done in the next 10 minutes. Thoughts?
I agree. Yeah, I would suggest you guys do it, put it on your agenda for some time, to revisit those bylaws. And then, I can speak for myself. I probably won't look at them again until you bring something to us.
My goal would be to have it, I think it'll be quick and easy. We would want to check with town lawyers and folks, but maybe have that folded into when we do a revised management plan, because right now it's an appendix to the management plan. So I think we can easily put a little subcommittee on that and deal with it over the next few months.
We can probably do the legal review. You don't have to
Right.
do that separately.
Right.
But the issue that will probably take some discussion is this 2/3 vote on whatever, it's an interesting structure, and no other structure has it.
I would like to also note that under the legal framework that the ACF committee and so forth meets under, the Vermont Land Trust will have to approve any changes to the bylaws.
Right, and they're gonna have to approve any changes to the management plan too.
Correct.
That's the other reason to put them all together. We'll get public comment. We'll have the review by you all and Vermont Land Trust all together. I don't see that as a huge issue.
Sounds like a plan.
And sorry, Jeff, you said Andrews committee is the only one that is a 2/3 majority of the other
Yeah.
committees are just simple majorities. Is that
They don't vote on things typically. I guess they do for the zoning, like the planning commission will vote on an amendment. And
we voted in the ARPA committee and the
Yeah.
gardening committee voted.
And it's a
whether-
majority, yeah.
Yeah.
It's always a majority.
Yeah, I mean, that again, that was put in anticipation of conflict over and
Okay,
trying.
There might be, I'm not saying that
Right.
it's bad. I'm just saying it's something to revisit.
Yeah, the other issue is this other committees appointing people to this committee.
Yeah.
I think that'll be actually almost stickier, and whether that we want to continue or that we want to modify.
Worth discussing.
Worth
Exactly.
discussing. Okay, moving on down. Item G, the role of zoning and the DRB in approving potential new trails. I've seen a lot of stuff going back and forth about that, so.
I might pass this on to Melissa because she knows more about this than me, although I have read some of the things that have been going across my desk recently. Do you want to?
Sure, I can take a very simplified stab at this, and please, if anybody else with more information would like to jump in. I'm just going to give a very brief summary of some technical information. Our subcommittee worked the couple of times, and we reached out to Keith Osborne from Planning.
Oborn. There's no Oborn. It's Oborn.
Oborn, I'm sorry, my apologies. Keith Oborn, and we checked in with him regarding zoning. And this is the very preliminary and a summary of the understanding that we have right now. And the purpose of bringing this up is to make sure that we're moving with the correct information and that everybody is on the same page. Richmond zoning regulations will be guidelines that must be followed for new trails. Richmond zoning regulations state that any new trails developed on slopes greater than 20% will require engineered plans for adequate erosion control per Richmond zoning regulations, section 6.11. Any new trail development in the forest may very well also require DRB approval. In addition to select board approval, we will need to make sure that all the zoning regulations are followed, and Tyler Misha, the town of Richmond zoning administrator, will be the person who will be assisting in determining if we will also be seeking DRB approval. And that's just a very brief summary of a lot of complicated emails.
Are there trails being proposed on greater than 20% slopes?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, how that works in terms of counting slope when there's switchbacks, I don't know, but
Right, I don't think there's any that go straight up 20%, but it's more like benching type trails on a slope.
On a
Right.
slope that is.
Yeah.
Okay,
Cecilia,
there-
question for you. Is there any rule or guideline that you follow already that calls for, no more than such a slope? Or is that something that you're looking for guidance on and therefore looking at planning and zoning?
I think in terms of actually building a good trail, there's a lot of best practices about slopes that Chase and other people in the room would know about. But this is to the point of whether or not we need to have DRB review, right? And I saw something that would confuse me in one of the attachments for today's meeting about one that says we don't have to review trails, and then in the next line it said unless we do. So just getting clarity on that. I'm glad you've spoken to Keith about that, and as long as we have clarity on that, that would be.
I think involving Keith more deeply will be important for us so that we make sure that we're moving in the right direction and have the correct information.
You might also want to talk with Tyler. So Tyler is a zoning administrator. Keith is the planner. And Tyler has, as the zoning administrator, he's the one that's most familiar with the zoning regulations. Although Keith knows a lot about it because he used to be our zoning administrator. But Keith is be good like staff support for your planning exercises. And Tyler really, he knows pretty much by the book what the zoning regulations require. Is there any restrictions by height, by elevation?
900 feet elevation
900 feet.
is in the zoning regulations, along with the 20% gradient.
If I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, but the 900-foot thing is in the town plan, which is a guidance document, not a legally binding document. And that's had some confusion because it's a goal, but it's not legally enforceable. You have it right?
Jay, is that the elevation? Actually, elevation.
Oh, the emails that I
Yeah.
exchanged.
Yeah, also in the town plan, unless I'm mistaken, it's strictly, oh, sorry.
Bart has his hand.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Bart, go ahead.
Thanks. So, yeah, I think we're kicking around items that are not in our area of subject matter expertise. I will say that unless I misread it, there was already a DRB review that said it expired 24 months from that date unless a zoning permit had been secured. And I will note that that 24 months has since passed. And then in terms of the 20-degree slope, my understanding is you can't avoid that by just building it back and forth, but it's an intent to have any road or path on a 20-degree slope properly engineered. And so that's part of the point. And I'll just say it deferring to zoning and planning on this stuff. But I will say I live against a hillside here in town that's it's probably a 30-degree slope. It's probably 250 feet high, 100, 250. It's pretty short. In the last rainstorm, there was a waterfall coming down that slope, and any place there was like a path, like from our dogs, was eroding. They had little deltas in that 200 feet coming straight down, which to me illustrates the caution or, making sure that we properly engineer any installation that might contribute to stormwater problems due to a construction issue, just for what that's worth. But again, really diverting and trusting zoning and the regulations and the administrator to give guidance on all that stuff.
We're not expecting any more rain, Bart.
I just have a question. Have any other trails come under DRB review in the past?
You mean on
No, any in
ACFC
Richmond.
or any?
No, any in Richmond.
The only trail that I recall that had a legal issue was the proposed Williams Hill Road Trail a couple of years ago, which
That was a different issue.
that was a different legal issue, yeah. But the DRB never even got to the DRB because the less stuff happened.
Yeah, I'm just also curious. I don't really have any thoughts on this. I feel like there's much more to learn, but just in my 10 years of doing trail building in Vermont, both with VYCC and other organizations, we've never come across having to do a DRB review, even in town forests, other towns we've worked in. So I just want to flag that as that's been my experience as a professional trail builder, is this has not come up, and we've always worked towards best management practices, which have gotten a lot better at preventing erosion. As we've seen after the floods of a lot of multi-use trails opening up a lot quicker than say the Long Trail, because they do manage floodwaters much better. But so I have a curiosity around this particular this DRB review, and maybe if we dig into that a little more, we might understand the whys behind some of that, as opposed to just sort of the process of, okay, now we have to do this, because it seems different from what my experience has been.
That's a good point. I'm not sure what the DRB would have to offer. I mean, no offense to the DRB, but they're concerned about development. They're concerned about benching for houses and roads coming in and so forth. I'm not sure they have a good grip on a trail. It's going to be slanted.
That's why we get lawyers the big bucks, I guess.
Well, true, but the trail builders that you guys have for the committee, solicitors, yeah, okay. I would assume they've got some really good data and user data on slopes of trails, how to bench them back, how to drain them, how to keep them running well. So I'd say start there.
And we all could talk to BLCC there, but we're not the only town in the state.
Yeah.
Bard, go ahead.
Normal.
I'll just observe, I'm not sure how relevant activities in other towns are to our zoning regulations. So revisit. Every town has their own zoning regulations. In fact, the town of Richmond, when were the first zoning regulations? John or somebody there probably remembers, like the 80s, 90s?
No, 1969.
69. So any trail you built before 1969, you do. Lots of trails on private land, people build things that are their own. I'm agnostic on this, but I think you really, really need to ask zoning as one member of the select board I'd be interested in how we ensure that anything we build doesn't contribute to a stormwater problem. I gotta tell you, just having been informed by recent events and stormwater, and it wasn't the flood, it was rain. So it's just something to get through. And I think those questions are relevant. I have heard this raised by numerous mountain bikers and trail builders in the past. Well, if we didn't have to do it there, do we have to do it here? And my short answer is here, you got to deal with the zoning regulations and regulators that exist in Richmond, for better or worse.
Yeah, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, just quickly, the issues of elevation and gradient as addressed in the zoning regulations, I think one would call them technical. They relate to erosion and other factors, but especially in the Andrews Community Forest, this is governed by a conservation easement, so there are additional considerations relating to wildlife corridors, wildlife preferred routes, and areas that we're wanting to protect from that perspective, as well as the just the topography.
Okay. So we have
Whether or not it should be in our zoning ordinance is something you should take up with the planning commission. And they are rewriting the zoning ordinance right now.
and they'd love to get more work.
Well, I mean, if it's an issue, it's, you know, it needs to be addressed.
Right.
But if it's in the zoning ordinance right now, it is a current regulation and, you know, they have to adhere to it.
Right. So that's why we need to talk to Steve and Tyler. Okay, time check, we have 11 minutes. We have 2 agenda items left. One of them will be very quick. It's agenda item H, review of open meeting regulations, Freedom of Information Act, and Vermont Public Records Act. Many people in town have asked about this briefly. Now I'm going to try to give the 30,000 foot view. People ask about open meetings law. Public discussion on public matters needs to be taking place in a public forum. And if 3 select board members walk into each other in a public park and start discussing select board business, that's an unwarranted meeting, and that is a violation of open meeting law. And that's something that is hard sometimes to avoid happening because you run into people, you gotta catch them. It's one of the most common things that we all run into, including the select board, is email discussion containing a quorum or more of members of a committee. If there are 9 members on a committee and 5 of them are on an email discussion about substantial matters, that's a violation. 4 is okay. I can email with Bart on something, that's okay. If I email with Bart and Lisa on something, it's not okay. So we just have to remember that. I'm not saying anybody egregiously goes out of the way to forget this. It's just something to always remember because people have asked. The only other thing I wanted to add has to do with the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, because quite a few people have said, if I'm emailing you something, is there any way I can keep that from being brought up if there's a FOIA request? And the answer is no, there is not. If you email me something, whether you send it to my personal email or my select board email, it is FOIA-able. And the law frowns on outright phishing expeditions, such as I want a copy of every email that you have received between 1995 and the year 2023 that contains the word "the." You know, there are points beyond which just absolutely meant as a harassment matter. But the law errs on the side of the plaintiff wanting the document. And so if somebody listening is thinking, I don't want my email that I sent you shared, can I redact my name? The law only really allows redaction in cases of actual life and limb. For example, where an abusive husband might try to FOIA where his ex-wife is currently living, that can be redacted. But if you want something to be as immune to FOIA as you can, you have to stay over the phone or in person. I'm not encouraging people to do that. I mean, ultimately, none of us have any secrets to hide, and that's why I'm asking people to kind of cut out the endless emails saying, do what I want, no, do what they want. I'd really like to have those discussions in public, because when things happen in public, then there's no need for FOIA, right? So I think openness is, what's the old cliche? Sunshine is the best disinfectant. Having discussions in public is what we should always be doing. And I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. I'm just saying it is a question we've been asked about a lot lately. Yeah.
The only other thing that I would add is I, for one, I really appreciate people contacting me. about any particular issue that they feel is important. Whether they do it by email or phone or, approach me in the grocery store. It's one of the most interesting things about this particular job is there's almost immediate feedback. That's different than Congress, We're a lot different than Congress in a lot of ways. I really hope. I think the way to think about this is it's fine to contact somebody with whatever you're thinking about. Just understand that whatever you're saying might come out in public. And that's not a bad practice anyway, think about whatever you're saying could be said in a public meeting. And it's an interesting learning curve for me in this job. Bart has helped me in this position of being here, sitting at the table and kicking me under the table. Maybe you don't want to say that, but it's interesting to do that. And I think if you couch your words that way, we shouldn't be afraid of any open communication that gets out of that.
But if anybody, I'll give you an example. I met with a constituent, a resident of Richmond, for an hour at Sweet Mountain on Saturday, just because she has a lot of interesting things to say. And there's only, when you email things back and forth, things get distorted. When people say little snippets in meetings, things get distorted. And I think what we're seeing tonight is an attempt to correct what's been happening in that regard. Face-to-face discussion, free of distortion, is what we should always be aiming for. So if anybody listening to this ever wants to sit with me at a coffee shop and bend my ear, I'm always available coming in. I'm in town. I'd rather get things clear and without confusion, even if it does take some time. Any other thoughts before we move on to our final agenda item? Okay, our final agenda item is all other business that may come relating to this. So
I have one, and I feel sad that they left already, but we had some former committee members here, and I just wanted to formally thank them for the help that they have given our committee over time, and was glad that they were able to join us tonight. I also want to acknowledge that we have lost 3 ACFC chairs, maybe all of them since Hannah have left in frustration. And so I think this has been a great step forward to have open conversation, but I think we'll also need some other time to sort of reflect on that. What have people been frustrated about? I'm a short timer in this position, so I'm looking for who can take over next, and I want to make sure we set them up for success. I just want to open up if anybody else wants to comment on either of those things, but I am grateful for everybody who served on this committee to date, because I'm now the only one. I've seen the entire 3 or 4 committees that we've had since then, and I've appreciated everything that everyone has offered.
okay, we have one hand up, Bob.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to quickly go back to the process of nominating people and when you're going to look at the bylaws. And the simplest way to get at this is the following question. Will the new members of the committee have to have a 2/3 majority approval by the Forest Committee?
As the bylaws currently stand, yeah.
And so we're still under the current bylaws for that, and also committee membership, where there's a confliction, because in one case, a committee such as the Trails Committee can have 1 member from its committee and 1 member at large, and in another location, both members have to be from the Trails Committee, similarly for the Conservation. So that let's leave it at that, and let somebody just clarify when you send out the announcement about looking for recruits that you really clarify exactly the process.
I'm going to follow up with you, Bob, because I heard you say that, and I don't see where the second thing is occurring. So we'll be in touch, and we'll figure that out before we send the announcement.
I think Bob makes a good point, and then I'll turn it to Lisa. I am counting, in addition to the members of the committees, the select board and the other committee, I'm seeing other people here in the room. I'm seeing people online. consider yourself invited right now to send a letter to Josh Arneson, town manager, CCing Cecilia, the select board, et cetera, and say, here's what I'd like to be on the ACF committee. That way you can have your name first in the hopper. The fact that you're here tonight electronically or in person says something. We need people who are willing to spend this time, and you, by just being here, at least meet that qualification. Lisa.
Cecilia, just off the top of your head, in less than 1 minute, I guess, what are the things that you seem to be stuck on in the committee? What are the bones of contention? What are the sore points? What, just a kind of a summary or whatever you think they are.
I don't know if that should be left to me, if anybody else
No
wants to
pressure.
jump in. That's why I said we should reflect on it a little bit rather than in the last minute, but go ahead.
And I guess I'd say a lot of our effort right now is to come up with a final plan to give to you all that represents the whole of the voices and will be suitable to you. And so we're really going back and forth saying, how do we get something that you will approve of, so we can hand something to the town that also represents the conglomerate of voices.
Okay, is it difficulty getting consensus on your end or some, or?
No, I think we're pretty good within our committee, and where we don't feel the need to agree absolutely on everything, but there's a fear that we're going to get feedback that we haven't done enough public input incorporation, and we're going to endlessly go back to the drawing board.
Well, if I can though, remember what we talked about earlier. The thing of, we've talked about this whole, well, I've been coming to all these meetings and I don't see why somebody who can only come now and then should have as much say as I do. I think we need to remember, like I said earlier, that there are a lot of people who can't come to meetings. And we can't say just because they can't come to the majority of meetings that they should have less input. That's what I've been trying to say all along, is we really need to make sure that people who just, for whatever legitimate logistical reason, have not been able to contribute, still get hurt. And that's what makes this such an incredibly hard job. And that's why you have my sympathy, because it is an incredibly hard job making sure that you've really gotten a representative set of opinions and then digesting it. That is not easy. So I'm not trying to say, you know, oh, go knock it out in the next 5 minutes. It's a hard job, but it's one that needs to be done.
And it is okay to have things that, you know, are so contentious that they can't be resolved. I mean, eventually it needs to be, but it's okay to have that happen. It's good, I think, in a way, because people feel, well, not emotional, but they feel very strongly about what they're saying and won't accept the compromise. So dig into that and see if you can find out really where that's coming from. But
and we look forward to,
everybody said okay to everything, and yeah, they're worthless.
And we look forward to trying to pay more attention. So the periodic updates, being able to watch the meetings with MSPTV, playing, or, you know, we're here if you have questions, you're there if we have questions. But at the end of the day, at the 9 o'clock hour, we need to talk more and do less through email and less through from forum and more through face to face if we can. Because I think we've seen tonight that does have benefits. Would anybody like to make any final statement before we move to adjourn?
I'd like to reiterate what Cecilia said. In preparing for this meeting, it's obvious that the Andrews Community Forest Committee has done a tremendous amount of work. There is more documentation that this committee has done than just about any other committee in town on anything outside of the Planning Commission. And it's impressive. It's difficult work. I really appreciate the time that you've all have put into it. So, thank you.
I'll say that.
Okay, well.
And thank you, everybody, including the public who've sat here listening to us talk to each other and occasionally chiming in. Thank you.
Okay, so as this isn't select board meeting technically, it's on us to move to adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Jay, this is David, so moved.
The motion for David Sander.
Second.
The motion for David Sander, seconded by Jeff Ford, to move to adjourn at 9:01 p.m. Please state your, is there any discussion? Seeing none, please state your name and your vote.
David, aye.
Jeff, aye.
Lisa, aye.
Bard.
Raising his hand. Sorry.
We're trying to let you vote, Bard.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, Bard, you are now able to vote.
Aye.
Hi, we are adjourned. Thank you so much. Drive safe, and we will see you around.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.